We are live with SCI TV. I am Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute. I'm joined by Dr. Ken Pendleton today. Welcome, Ken.
Hi, Josh. I'm excited to talk about our subject for today.
Yeah, and make no mistake, this one is going to be all about inflation on the football. This is Deflategate Day. We are right in the heart of information leaking out about an investigation about whether or not the New England Patriots intentionally deflated the footballs for use during their game in the AFC Championship this past weekend against the Indianapolis Colts. Just to layer in a couple of the facts, and then let's get to the philosophical underpinnings. From what we know now, according to Chris Mortensen of ESPN, it sounds as though 11 of 12 of the footballs used in the first half, when tested, showed to be a pound or two light on pressure per square inch. So that's not a weight issue, it's about the firmness, and many quarterbacks and receivers prefer it that way in inclement weather because it's easier to catch and throw. And then in the second half, they corrected the problem, tested the second batch, which is part of the 24 allotment that the Patriots bring to the equation, and use those for the second half of fully inflated footballs. And we still don't know a lot of information, Ken, yet about whether they were fully checked to begin the game, whether someone intentionally changed them, whether it's an oversight. There's still a lot of information coming through, which may, have some implications, or even how pervasive this issue is beyond this game. So, Ken, let's talk about the bigger issue here to begin with. What are some of the philosophical considerations in play when you're talking about a scandal about this, which is really representing the integrity of the game itself?
For me to really understand the philosophical issue in this, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, and by the beginning, all the way back camp transformed rugby into football history in American commerce, and that he thought that rugby was a feudal sport because it was continuous. And so when the ball is in play in rugby, they have scrums to decide who get possession. He thought that was very disorganized and chaotic, and so he eliminated the scrum in rugby and replaced it with scrimmage. And so after a player was tackled, you would allow for the team to essentially reorganize, call a new play. And so by doing that, he very consciously thought that he was introducing the possibility of modern form of organization, where you all of a sudden have precise planning as opposed to improvisation, specialization as opposed to versatility, you have precise coordination as opposed to experiential understanding of your teammates or intuitive understanding of your teammate, and you have a hierarchy. So the quarterback, who is a quarterback from the center, we decided whether to give the ball to the fullback or the halfback, right? So the quarterback had a cerebral role right from the beginning, and that represented what he saw as a managerial structure that eventually included coaches. Right? And so, why is this important? Well, what you essentially unleash here is something that we've almost never talked about in the history of sport. What's really important on American football compared to other sports is it created a climate that facilitated a game that switched from being a player's game, like rugby or soccer, or still are to a huge degree, to being a coach's game. And so gradually that influence was extended, where all of a sudden you eventually allowed for coaching, which at the time was considered a violation of amateurism. You allowed for substitutions. You had coaches start calling plays. You had coaches allowed to call timeouts so they could reorganize. So what that eventually led to was an entirely different organization of the way football was organized, where you have position coaches and you have scouts and you have quality control coaches, and no one has done this better than Bill Belichick. To me, the Patriots had what he's accomplished since he took the job in 2000 is just remarkable, because it's not that he's had more success than other coaches, it's that he's had a comparable level of success in an era where you have a salary cap and you have more parity than any sport has probably ever enjoyed in history, and to consistently find a way to be 1 or 3 steps ahead is an amazing tribute to what Belichick has accomplished. I explain the problem with this is to go back to the first real defining moment of his career. So his defensive game plan for the 1991 Super Bowl when he was defensive coordinator for the Giants and they upset the Buffalo Bills is in the Hall of Fame. And the part that everybody likes to emphasize is the part that talks about how he deliberately convinced his defenders to allow Thurman Thomas to get over 100 yards. I mean, these were fiercely prideful defenders on the Giants, and yet Belichick said, "Look, it's better than having him pass the ball. We're going to slow down the game, and one way to do it is to encourage them to run and give up over 100 yards." The second thing he did was he realized that Jim Kelly, he concluded, I shouldn't say realized because maybe it's not true, but he thought that Jim Kelly made really a good adjustments between series, but not good adjustments while his team was on the field. And so he never stayed with the same defensive philosophy for 2 series in a row. So he really thought, I'm going to constantly adjust, so Kelly is always adjusting to what I've already just done. Right? Now, those are the parts that is football, right? That is the managerial control of football, convincing your players not to try to just stop the run, crush them, but we're going to do that. Well, that might be okay, but here's the other things he told his players. He goes, look, flagrant, accidentally kick the ball away if there's a stoppage in play. Play a stop. He's not saying deliberately get injured. But don't. If you do happen to get injured, don't make sure you get the maximum advantage for us as a team. When you tackle someone, disentangle from the pile really, really slowly, so the Buffalo, who runs a no huddle offense, can't get back to the line of scrimmage. So what you really see there, though, is sportsmanship gave way to gamesmanship, and I'm not saying Bill Belichick was the first person to ever think of that idea. But what I am saying is what you've seen is now is a game that's characterized by gamesmanship, and so Spygate, which involves spying on the New York Jets, was a logical step to take if you thought you could get away with it. If it's going to help you get that little advantage, just like disentangling from a pile, you would do it. And if you thought, and again, we don't know all the facts yet, but if you thought having a football that was easier to throw or catch was going to give you an advantage, and there's a loophole in the way the NFL set this up where you think you can plausibly get away with it, it makes sense that you should do it. Now, I'll just give you one other example. So let's say a cornerback gets beat by a receiver. Does the coach say, hey, don't grab that guy and prevent him from scoring because he beat you fair and square? No, we say grab the guy, take the penalty, a hold preferably, but pass interference if need be, to prevent the big play. Right? So we no longer think of sportsmanship as the primary part of football. We think of gamesmanship as that, and no one has embodied that, even before this incident, better than Bill Belichick.
Absolutely, and with this particular example, so we think that this is a good example of how values are no longer around sportsmanship, have shifted towards gamesmanship, and we can question the values and be upset with the values, but in essence, if we want to prevent or resolve these type of issues, we probably should be operating at a different space. We should really be looking at what are some of the structural issues around it, and what do the league want in terms of outcomes. Do they want everyone to have a ball that they prefer, right? Which is a current situation where both offenses get to bring in their footballs inflated within the boundaries that they are permitted to, scuff them up a bit, and all of this, or do we want it just introduces a neutral ball that the league would introduce? These things matter, the structures, to allow for that gray area where that gamesmanship is now occurring, as you were speaking. Any thoughts on that shift that we've gone from sort of a moral code to the rule book itself?
Yeah. So let's think about why the NFL does 2 things. Why is it kickers are allowed to use footballs that are different than the regular players? And this NPR had a story about this yesterday, and they talked about how they would even try to microwave the football to make it, all sorts of experiments have been done, really bizarre experiments, to try to figure out how can we make this the most friendly football for making field goals. And then also, why would you want to, say, have the players get to choose their football as opposed to the league doing it? And I think both of those go back to a time when the level of execution in the NFL was much lower. So if you go back to even the 70s, Terry Bradshaw's a Hall of Fame quarterback with a 50% completion percentage ratio. Right now, good quarterbacks complete 65-70% of their passes. And kickers used to, before 1965 and the introduction of soccer-style kicking, with the exception of Lou, the percentage, fewer drops, having more made field goals actually made sense. But now the level of execution is so high that I think that the need for these kind of modifications or indulgences, if you will, has long gone. So so if the percentage of completions went down 3% because everybody had to play with the same football, is that really going to harm the game? And if anything, I think most of us now think kicking needs to be harder. I think in one way to do that would to say let's just all use the same football, where the NFL is going to inflate every football to say 13 pounds of pressure, and they're going to control the footballs the whole time, and they're going to put them in play. And Tom Brady and Andrew Luck use the same football. Adam Vinatieri and Stephen Gostkowski use the same field goal. And it's a level playing field. And then they save themselves what's now an incredibly embarrassing situation. I'll give you a very anecdotal, but my wife Rebecca, she is all about the Patriots. One, because she thinks Tom Brady's the cutest guy in the world, and two, because she cannot stand Richard Sherman, especially since her father went to Stanford. She is beside herself this morning. She is going to root for Seattle now because she is so angry that they would be this petty to try to do something this little. And so all of a sudden, instead of focusing on the Super Bowl, you've got a public relations nightmare and something that could really affect how someone is viewed historically, because the league didn't try to prevent the problem by having the same footballs used all the time. That's really, this is, we always talk about preventing problems, but this is preventing problems 101, and I don't understand why the NFL has waited this long to react to this when they could have proactively thought about how the game has evolved and how some of these minutiae should have changed.
I mean, for any of us who played sandlot sports, we always would argue over which ball to use because you start to prefer it. And in basketball, you bring your own ball because you thought it gave you a little advantage if you brought it to the playground. And in football, you'd probably spend 10 minutes arguing over whose football, and they'd be all over the place for size. But this is a professional organization, and you would imagine that standardizing needs to just be part of the practice from the get-go to not even put teams in a position where they're tempted, right? If you're going to accept that value system has changed from yesteryear, then you start working on systems that work.
I couldn't hear your question. We had bad audio.
Ken, I was just saying that you would imagine that you would start shifting towards systems that work away from the idea that a moral code is going to drive it if you've accepted that there's a change as you've structured early in our conversation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I hate to go back. We talked about the modern game of football, but you have to, even in the, as Aristotle put it so well, naughtiness is a cup that is never full. And since the very beginning of football, teams have sought ways to manipulate the rule and get the advantage, and that's been true of sports in general. What's really true of football, though, is that the game has allowed for, because of the complexity of the rule book and what Mr. Camp unleashed, it allows for that all the time. And so therefore, the NFL has generally been incredibly good about being proactive. They're the opposite of baseball. They're not traditionalists. They constantly modify the game to think about what is going to be best for the spectacle, if you will. And I think in this particular instance, they were reactive, rather than being proactive. And so many other times, they've been proactive in the right way. So I really want to say that I think they've realized that football sort of shifts with the times and the evolution of the sport, and mostly they've got it right. And so in this instance, I think that they were just behind the curve. And if I may, I want to draw one other parallel with what Camp did. I think is really interesting. So Walter Camp, while he was volunteer unpaid football coach at Yale, also ran a clock factory. And I think when we think of what makes a good business, we like to think of what a good clock factory would have: a better clock. It would have the best clock makers. It would have the most efficient production system. It would have the best sales force out there selling you on the virtues of this state-of-the-art clock. But in reality, as we know, what makes a business tick in a lot of ways is doing all those little things. It's knowing how to bill out in a way, pay the bills to your vendors in a way that's that allows you to draw interest for the longest period of time. How to maybe work around some OSHA standards. How to how to essentially work within the system, not cross the line of illegality unless you think the cost is worth it. And that's going to actually maximize your profits. So Gary Fensick of the Chicago Bears talks about the '85 Bears recently, and he said, look, the key was for us, you hit the quarterback hard 10 times every game. And he goes, now you try to get him legitimately, but sometimes you take a late hit in a 15-yard penalty, and he's a stockbroker now, and he goes, that's sort of like getting a penalty for trading illegally, and you say, oh well, I'll pay that penalty. I made a nice profit. Now and similarly, the quarterback is disabled, right? And so I think that's the real, what Belichick did actually realize the full vision of Camp's ideal. And again, I want to be careful here. We don't know yet the football story, but Spygate, the game plan in the Buffalo Bills game, and if I may, when Vince Lombardi coached Ray Nitschke, he had a really troubled background. Lombardi wanted to win with Nitschke, but he really believed he was trying to transform Nitschke as a person from his troubled background. Whereas what Bill Belichick said about signing players, and he signed a lot of high-risk players like Albert Hainsworth, Randy Moss, etc., what he said was, look, some guys you decide, I just can't have that guy on my team, but others you ask, can I manage that guy? But notice what's missing there. There's no pretense of, we're going to transform Aaron Hernandez into an upstanding citizen, right? Everybody knew he had trouble from before his first game at Florida, or at least they should have. But what they asked was, Bill Belichick is not in the character transforming business like Vince Lombardi. He's in the risk management business. And so football Camp's vision, for better and for worse, has been realized. Football represents almost perfectly the managerial model that's actually applied in corporate America across the spectrum. And that's what makes it so darn fascinating.
Agreed. Well, if that's the shift, then, as we always prescribe, we're talking about changing structure, putting controls in place, and putting systems in place to deal with this up front, and not being surprised when people shift the boundaries that you have and look for new norms. And I would say there's a lot of evidence here when you hear from other quarterbacks publicly saying things they've done to the ball and how they try and game it, that those boundaries may have shifted beyond where the rules are already. And so one of my hopes for the NFL is that whatever investigation they do, they expand it wide enough to see what systemically is going on around the football and make changes that reflect the needs to have a fair and balanced playing field from there. Okay, Ken, any final last thoughts before we go? I think we're basically out of our time here, and we can certainly revisit this as the days ahead.
No, I think you punctuated this perfectly.
Okay. Well, Ken, have a great afternoon.
Okay, so
stay tuned.